Facebook and YouTube Live. And if you're checking this out for the first time, this live stream is all about supporting and serving your needs as nurse educators who are in the trenches to empower you with practical strategies to best prepare students for real-world practice. And if we haven't met, my name is Keith. I'm the founder of Keith RN. And really my passion and my why is to lead the changes that are needed to best kind of close the ongoing academic practice gap. We sometimes make it way too complicated to teach nursing. And it's my passion to say, let's simplify it. Let's emphasize practice first so we can better prepare students for practice using educational best practices. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us tonight. And I'm really excited to share a topic that is really important and relevant to every nurse educator who teaches clinical. But what I'd love to do is just introduce yourself. I want you to we've got a great audience tonight. You're here. Let us know who's out there. And I'm going to just keep the chat open. And again, this is going to be a dialogue. As we get to our guests in about 10 minutes, you're going to have a chance to ask questions, clarifying questions. And so I want to know who's out there. Just give us your first name, where you're coming from. And would love to get a sense of who's out there. I just want to let you all know that we're going to get in a conversation with 4 clinical faculty. I've never had 4 together at once, but this is going to be really exciting because last month, Beth Corner, director and faculty at Mid-Michigan College in Michigan, obviously, and an ADN program that's doing some innovative work, basically talked about how to eliminate clinical paperwork in the 4th semester. And we had some incredible conversations in the chat as well as in the Facebook group afterwards. And many were saying, how do you get there? Beth was the ending. And so therefore it was kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit, looking back. It's okay. Tonight, we're going to put the cart in front and we're going to say what came before Beth in semesters 1, 2, and 3, and then closing with Beth doing a completely oral care plan. And so we're going to talk about the strategies that these innovative faculty from an ADN program in Michigan are doing to really improve clinical judgment and practice readiness. And I'm really excited to share them with us tonight. But just a little housekeeping before we get there. Last month, Beth Corner shared, as I mentioned, and Beth was generous enough to do she did a blog article for Keith RN. And she basically did a 5-minute little YouTube video. And for those of you that may have missed who missed her last week, I'm going to put the blog that she wrote so you can have a reference point. If you missed her last month, no worries. The blog article explains everything as well as a wonderful video she did. And just a heads up that Brooklyn, who is going to be presenting today as well, also has written a blog article for Keith RN with a video that'll be posted next Wednesday. So if you get my Keith RN updates, you'll get that in your inbox probably next Wednesday. So be looking for it. If you don't get my updates, please go to my website, keithrn.com. I got a free case study I want to give you on next gen reasoning, a wonderful unfolding case study. Sign up for that, get the free case study. And then you basically will get the updates, about 2 updates a month. I don't spam you, but great content to help you and support your needs in nursing education. I also want you to know that I've been, doing these Facebook Lives that are actually now kind of on YouTube as well, on my YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse. And I want you to know that I've got some great content there to support you as an educator. So I want you to basically, if you haven't subscribed to Think Like a Nurse, the YouTube channel, some great content. Prior Facebook Lives and YouTube Lives are there, like Beth's full hour. If you want to get everything, get the Facebook or the YouTube Live, easy to access. And so I just want you to know that is available to best support and serve your needs in nursing education. But before we get started, we got to talk a little housekeeping here. Nurses Week and Nurses Month. We we have Nurses Week and Month in May because it's Nightingale's birthday, who innovated the modern profession of nursing. But, something I just wanted to kind of, as I look at the Facebook group, I'm blessed to be the admin for a Facebook community called Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. If you're not a member, please do so, because it's just a wonderful supportive community of 15,000 educators from around the world that I'm just blessed to kind of corral and to just serve and to kind of guide the conversations. But the bottom line is, there has been a lot of posts that nurses are tired, they're worn, they're weary, and they just want to kind of pack their bags and go home. They're tired because there's a lot of challenges that we face in nursing education. Nurses make a difference, but I would propose as a hypothesis that nurse educators make a bigger difference, because you have the ability to impact the next generation of professional nurses. And that's not an easy task, because how many of you know we have a lot of challenges? We have student entitlement. We have just the incivility in the academic settings. We have just the workloads. But sometimes we put too much work on ourselves and our students. But I just want to share an encouraging comment. This is from a book written by a contemporary of Florence Nightingale, Isabel Hampton Robb. I got this at a garage sale at a thrift store for 25 cents, was written in 1900. Now, Isabel Hampton Robb was to America what Nightingale was to England. Hampton Robb was a contemporary in the same generation of Nightingale, and she wrote textbooks. And if you haven't heard of Isabel Hampton Robb, you've heard of three things that she was the founder of in the United States: the American Nurses Association, the American Journal of Nursing, and the organization that later became the National League for Nursing. She's a big deal. But Hampton Robb has some wonderful quotes. I'm going to share one that I hope will encourage you today. Before we get started with today's topic, she said this to her students in the text, Nursing Ethics. Now, this is a really kind of powerful, that we had a textbook on nursing ethics. Do we even have a textbook on this topic anymore? Or does it even get a chapter in most textbooks? We need to think about that. But this is what she said. The spirit in which the nurse does her work makes all the difference. Invested as she should with the dignity of her profession and the cloak of love for suffering humanity, she can ennoble anything her hand may be called upon to do. And for work done in this spirit, there will ever come a recompense far outweighing silver or gold. Now, what she said in that first sentence is powerful for you as a nurse educator and for every nurse. The spirit in which you do the work makes all the difference. It's not the thinking like a nurse. That's important. But the spirit, what are you bringing with caring, compassion, humility, serving? That spirit is what makes the difference. And I think that as educators, we got to get back to our why. Why are we doing what we're doing? We ask ourselves that question way too many times. And it's true, because it is hard. But if teaching's a calling for you, if you know that this is something that you have been called to do, it is something of a ministry, it is something to leave a legacy. You know what? You need to persevere and make a difference, because we need to embrace the hard path sometimes as educators. We don't tolerate the hard path, though. But we sometimes need to recognize there is a purpose to the pit that we sometimes find ourselves in. And I believe that as a Christian, God can use the hard things. In fact, that's the time that you are most open to change and to do what is needed to basically perfect yourself as an educator and as a person. And so I just want to encourage you that if you're experiencing some hard times right now, there's a purpose to that pit, and be open to what lessons can be learned as well as what needs to change so that the pit doesn't continue, whether it's an academic pit or a personal or relational pit. And so just want you to know that, when I look back at my journey, I was rejected as an educator. When I taught in 2 programs, I was shown the door as a temporary hire each time. And it was because of the darkest forms of incivility. It was withholding information to set me up to fail at the end of the year. And I was let go. I was just told, we don't need you. even though my students found value, and I'm no different than what you see today. And I kind of almost threw it away. I almost threw away my calling and my passion to teach and was saying, F this, I can make more money and less stress in clinical practice. But, God opened a door, and Keith RN, 11 years ago, just a website and case studies, and it continues to grow. And I'm just humbled by the opportunity to serve educators and just support them, as well as just kind of maybe a little pep talk. I hope you don't take offense at this, but we need to kind of step back and embrace the hard times and what we can learn from them, especially as nurse educators. And I just want you to know that I will do everything I can to support you through the resources and this opportunity for the live stream tonight. And so without further ado, I just kind of, want to introduce our four faculty today, and let me just kind of pull them up one by one. And I want to thank all of you. We have a wonderful turnout tonight. This is incredible. I mean, it's always good to have, whoever shows up. And this link can be shared. It goes to my YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse. That'll be there as soon as we're done. You can share the link with other faculty who couldn't be here. So many of you asked in the Facebook group, if I didn't make it tonight, is it, will I get it? And yes, you will. It lives forever, especially on the YouTube channel. Think Like a Nurse is the easiest way to grab it. And so want you to do that. And thank you, Brenda, for sharing. That's just my heart. And so let me just get that out of the way, and let's move on for what you all came for tonight. So just want to thank you all for just joining me tonight. If I took the time to recognize you all, that would just take too much time. So please understand, but I just am humbled and thankful that you're all with us tonight. And so without further ado, we are going to introduce all four clinical faculty from Mid-Michigan College, starting. It's kind of like, I feel like we're doing like a basketball warm up here, but I'm going to start with semester 1 at Mid-Michigan College. We've got Brooklyn Snigaki. And Brooklyn is an RN who graduated in 2011. It's a full-time faculty at Mid-Michigan for the foundation students. And she's the one who started it off with just 4 pages of clinical paperwork that we will be talking about shortly. And so, Brooklyn, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having us all, Keith.
You're so welcome. And in the second semester, I'm having fun tonight for a change. We have got in the corner, we've got Jennifer Swartz. She is a DNP RN, graduated in 2000, and is currently full-time at Mid-Michigan in the Adult Health 2 student group. She's a passion for teaching her students and helping her students succeed, and continues to work with other local nursing programs and medical centers. And in semester 3, we have got Leslie Peterson, MSN RN, and a fellow CE-Ed. I'm an ER nurse as well, Leslie, so it's great to have you here. She graduated as a nurse in 2007 and is currently full-time faculty member at Mid-Michigan as well for Adult 2 students as well, and continues to work the bedside as an ER nurse. And finally, do I have Beth here? Yes, I do. And I got Sharon. It says Sharon, but there's not a Sharon here. So I don't know. I'm just going to get, we have got in semester 4, a remake from final last month. And that's Beth Corner, who started this journey with all of us. And she's the director and a full-time nursing faculty. I don't know how she does it. Maybe it's a small program, but she does it both. And she was with me last month, so be sure to catch her conversation, because she's just going to tie the loop. So, they're all going to be participating tonight, but the bottom, you can ask questions of all of them. But, Beth is teaching med-surg, emergent and critical care content, and she is a former firefighter and paramedic. So don't mess with her. I think she's a tough girl. And so anyways, it's a blessing to have all 4 of them with us tonight. And I just want to get started with the conversation and really just kind of, faculty are wanting to know, okay, Beth, we talked about last week, how you did, in essence, no clinical paperwork except a prep sheet. And that's kind of the missing link that we didn't really kind of talk about last month, that I think we need to kind of, maybe just for Brooklyn, is that what Beth shared with me is that you all kind of create, the students create their own prep sheet and basically be, to kind of collect that data. And I would just like to know, did that start with you, Brooklyn, in your semester? Or where did that prep sheet to help them kind of make their own from the very beginning, which is what I do after 36 years of practice? I still have my own prep sheet. When I'm in ICU and I have, I have my own way of organizing. Tell me when that process begins and how you do it, because we don't have to make it so regimented. Let the students create their own with some guidance. So tell us about that process, starting with the prep sheet, how you do it at Mid-Michigan.
Is that one for me?
That can be for anybody who does that. Maybe that's Beth. I mean, I was understanding that they're doing a patient prep sheet early in the program. And is that correct or not correct? Maybe I misunderstood, Brooklyn.
No, that is correct. So Beth, you want to?
So the prep sheet or the organization sheet really kind of starts when they enter into the hospital. So in Adult Health 1 and followed in Adult Health 2, and then it continues on to Adult Health 3. Because as you know, sometimes as you get going, you kind of find new grooves, right? You start it in Adult Health 1, and then it kind of progresses throughout till the end.
Okay, excellent. And so the students basically, and you guide that process, Beth. I mean, how do you get that started to create a prep sheet? And how do students have that flexibility to kind of, in essence, begin their journey as a nurse? Because every nurse has their own prep sheet. Sometimes they're standardized from the unit, but we all have our own way. So how do you kind of just, how does that look? Just so we can give faculty who are listening and those that will watch the recording, how can we guide them to empower students to kind of create that first step of their ownership of the collection of data as a nurse? And I think that's a huge first step, and I really love that strategy.
So
The floor right 2 days, and so I went to the floor that I was working on, and that was the sheet that they used. And then as the students went to various floors, we just kind of said, okay, what are you doing, so that they were introduced to many different sheets, and so then they could kind of pick and choose. And so by the end they could say, well, this is working for me, this is not working for me. And it gave them the autonomy to really decide what works best for their brain, because not everything works the same for all of us. So we just started with what was on the floor at the time. And then as we kind of jump around to different floors and even different facilities, we just kind of introduce it to the students and let them kind of make their own path.
Wonderful, wonderful. And, I just kind of want to start, as you look at your journey at Mid-Michigan College, I'd like to know, what was the catalyst to put your clinical paperwork on a diet? And I think, Brooklyn, you were the kind of, from what I got from your blog article that I read already, tell us about what that looked like. So I think maybe you'd be the best person to start that out, and then anyone else can jump in. So why change? Like, hey, we've been doing clinical for how many years this way? Why should we do anything different?
Well, for me, and I don't mean to be too blunt here, is even when I was doing clinical, I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, we had these lovely multiple page care plans. And to this day, I can tell you that my care plans were the prettiest. They were the most color coordinated. I was very proud of all of the lines and arrows that I could make, but I could not tell you one single thing practically that I took away from those hours and hours of work that I spent not sleeping and not spending time with family and not eating and all of these things that we do to get through nursing school. So then when I got into the professional educator role, I took over foundations about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. It was a 17-page nursing process worksheet, 17 pages. And I took a look and I was like, oof. And some of my students will tell you that's what I say when I look at something and I'm like, oh, that's not right. Oof, I have a sticker, it's a whole thing. And I was just like, we as nurse educators, like, we already have so many things we do. We don't need this huge 17 every single week, a burden of 17 pages. The students don't need a burden of 17 pages to do every single week. And it's not telling me anything as an educator, like about their critical thinking process. It's essentially, regurgitate to me every single thing about your patient that you can remember 48 hours after the fact. And I just wasn't really, I didn't feel that it was helpful to the students or to me as an educator trying to validate what they're learning. So I said, well, and I pitched that whole thing, not to put too fine a point on it, and decided that we really needed to do, or I really needed to do something different to figure out how to get them practice ready, I guess, at that point.
Mm-hmm. And so basically you began to do, you kind of, how did you identify, because a lot of faculty here, 17 pages, that's extreme. But we all, I think, if we're all to honestly reflect and look at our clinical paperwork, many cases we have too much information. And so for Brooklyn, you basically were able to go from 17 pages to 4 pages. And I'd like to kind of just, what were the strategies that you used at the fundamental foundations level to basically begin to put that on a diet and identify really what is most important? And I'm assuming you put on the lens of clinical practice. You kind of looked at not what is important from an academic and making this long, flowery nursing process report, but really from a practice perspective. But how did you do it? Because I want to kind of, and I'd like your other colleagues to jump in to kind of, how this dances with the paperwork element first, because clinical paperwork isn't evil. The fact is we just need to get them to prepare for an oral care plan so that they can think on their feet like practice. But having some paperwork is still a win. It just has to be the right amount. So how did you determine what to include at that foundations fundamental level, and the others, and then the other faculty that followed you, how did that get either whittled or slightly added and made more advanced? So I'd like to kind of get a sense of the big picture principles that those that are listening, and if you have questions, I want to make this very clear. I just kind of want to get the conversation started. But then if you have questions as we talk, those that are attending live, this is your event. You put in your question in the chat. I got my chat wide open. I want you to basically, we will answer every question as able tonight. We'll go until about 9 o'clock Central Time. So anyways, we need to know, how do you put it on a diet? How do you go from 17 to 4? What did that journey look like? And what did you basically decide?
Okay, well, I will start that off. So I tell my students all the time, you can't chart the most efficient course if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what your end goal is. Just like when you're charting a course on a map, you have to know your destination to figure out what the best way is to get there. So I thought, what at the end of this semester do I really want my students to be able to do? Which is, clinical practice is all about doing. It's about thinking too, but action follows thought. So if they're doing these, and if they're showing me these sound, clinical reasoning that translates into clinical judgment, then I know that the thought is there. So what do I want to see them do? What should they be able to talk to me about the steps that they took? What thoughts got them there? And that's kind of what I focused on as far as what should I put in my clinical paperwork. And it's a little bit different than, Leslie's or Jen's or Beth's, because by the time they get to Beth, they're essentially rock stars. I don't want to brag, but our students are pretty much rock stars. And they have a lot more pieces. And foundations, it's different. I have to say, okay, so we're looking at our H&P and our labs and our meds. What picture is that forming for you about your patient before you look at them, before you touch? Like, what thoughts do you have? Okay, so now we're moving to the next part. You've gotten report. Does that change? Does that stay the same? Okay, now we're doing our assessment. How does that validate or invalidate what you've thought? So essentially, the clinical paperwork that I'm going with right now is not so much a clinical paperwork, like a clinical companion, I guess, guiding them. Here are the steps we take every day as nurses. Here are the thoughts we have every day as nurses. That'll be second nature to you eventually, but here's how you get there. So that's what my paperwork I'm trying to start out as. Prioritize your problems. What are you delegating? Why are you delegating? What are your focuses? And then it moves on to Leslie's, where it can get a little bit more involved, advanced, putting those pieces together.
Okay, well, I'm going to pause right here because I want all of you who are attending to give Brooklyn a big thank you. because she gave me permission to share her 4 pages of clinical paperwork on a Word document that is now an Amazon S3 link that I created that you could easily download. And so I'm going to pop that in the chat. And I want those of you that are interested, would like to see and learn more, you can essentially download that, and it's copyrighted, but you have Brooklyn's consent to use it in your program as you see fit. But give her some credit. Make sure you honor her copyright and communicate where you got it from. But she's sharing it with you all. And so the starting point is a win, and you can take it from there and build on. And so having that as a foundation of those that have, that basically are not going to see that paperwork, they're going to download it hopefully right away and take a look. And so Leslie, as we look at those opening priorities, again, of kind of identifying what is most and least important with the different aspects of the scenario, and now what's your priorities, and kind of just unfolding that in really a way that a nurse thinks, what are you doing with that paperwork or the thinking processes from semester 1 now to semester 2? And is the context of your clinical acute care? And so kind of give us a background with that.
So the students for me in Adult Health 1, they step onto a med-surg unit at various facilities. And the paperwork that we use with my students is about 3 pages. So they go through, and part of it is initially identifying the disease process, what kinds of labs, diagnostics, things that they would want to monitor with that. And then also, how would they know that their patient's starting to decline? So what kind of signs and symptoms would your patient start to show if they were declining? To hopefully get
so you're
that
introducing problem recognition skills. And one of the questions that I ask, I'm not quite sure if it's in your paperwork, but it's kind of like I always ask my students, like, what is the most likely or worst possible complication that could develop? And then how do you identify it early? What are the early signs of decompensation with either or? And I'm just curious if you see it the same way, or do you ask that question a little bit differently?
So I have them try to picture exactly what is going on with the patient as far as, are they going to become diaphoretic? Are they going to become short of breath? Are they going to have increased pain, sensation changes, those types of things? And I usually have them list minor problems or complications all the way to major problems and complications, and then identifying how they would recognize that on their patient.
And that is so important because any patient has the potential to go south, even if they're stable. Things can change suddenly. It's unlikely, but a vigilant nurse is a safe nurse. And when our nurses, when our students don't get the sense that, something can go wrong here, and I need to be looking for it, like a lifeguard, looking for that struggling swimmer who's going under, a patient who is beginning to show early signs. And I love that emphasis, Leslie. And I would agree with you. When I look at my journey as a nurse educator and nurse, is that, problem recognition skills is a more advanced skill. So we don't need to introduce it at fundamentals, just lay the foundation, getting the essence of the scenario with Brooklyn's paperwork. Now we're introducing problem recognition. So we're scaffolding, just like the curriculum. We're scaffolding our clinical and the complexity of clinical reasoning that goes with it. And anything else that you specifically add or subtract at semester 2. And then Jen, you're going to be next, and kind of what that looks like in semester 3. So other closing thoughts, Leslie, with kind of what you're doing with your emphasis in semester 2.
So another thing that I do for them is to have their have them identify the top 3 priority problems for their patient for the day. And I tried to explain that to the students as that their priority problems may not necessarily even be related to their admitting diagnosis. Because when they were admitted and you're now seeing them on hospital day 3, your priority problems could be quite different depending on the care that was taking place. And so they go through and identify their priority problems and what indicates to them any labs, those types of things that they would want to monitor because of their problem. And then, rationalizing why they chose a first, second, and third priority problem.
And you know what I hear you doing, Leslie, is what they call in the literature pattern recognition. Like, how does their problem connect to their lab values, and what is kind of like that your data is connected in practice. You know, this causes this, and helping them to see the matrix, to see the patterns, kind of like the concept map does that in a visual. You're helping them do that in the context of clinical as well. So again, that's a higher level skill. That's a higher level clinical judgment skill, and well done.
Thank you.
All right, Jen, you're semester 3, correct?
Correct.
So tell us, what's the setting of your your semester 3 clinical, and what are you doing differently or similar to what Leslie communicated with her clinical work?
Well, I do. My job is basically to kind of help them skim it down. They're gathering a lot of information over the first semester and trying to determine what's important and what's not important. And as they get to Leslie, that starts the process. But when they get to me, I'm really about honing them down. Because when I get them, they want to tell me their hemoglobin, their hematocrit, their red blood cell, their sodium, their chloride. I'm like, okay, just stop right there.
Not that important, and depending on what the patient's here for.
Exactly. And let's, even if it is a hemoglobin, I don't need you to read me the hemoglobin, the hematocrit, and the red cell. Let's talk about the difference between those three. And can you tell me why I don't really need to know all three? If I know one, if you're going to base it on this, I don't need. And have you ever treated anybody for chloride deficiencies in your acute care semester? So I mean, think about what's important. What do I need to know? And my other goal during this time is I have an SBAR that's written out, and I break it into situation, background, assessment, and recommendations, but I make them give me a verbal report as they're writing it on their paper. And then we're like, okay, why is that not important? Why is this important? What do you add? What do you take away? When we get to our assessment section, it's about what labs now, because I made you pinpoint only the ones that were a priority. No nurse, and that's what I tell them all the time, is going to stand there in your report and listen to you read off 17 meds to them and 17 labs. Nobody needs to know their med list unless it's a new med in terms of something you're actively treating because something has changed during your shift. They have a MAR. They can go look at it. Don't tell me that, right? In your report or your SBAR, I don't need you to list out every allergy that they have. No one is going to stand there and listen to you list out every allergy that you have. So my goal really is to hone down the SBAR and make them much more condensed in that and be able to understand what's important and what's not important. So we do it on paper initially. So the first, it's an 8-week clinical. So we do 4 weeks where they're writing it all down. They have one patient. They start off with one patient, and then they move to in week 3, 4, and 5. They do a shared patient. So I make them delegate back and forth, report off to each other to go to lunch. So they're practicing their SBAR, and then they watch each other's patients while they're gone. When they come back, they do another report, and they switch, and the other one goes to lunch. And that gives them more practice with that reporting because they really struggle with what's important and what's not important.
Yes.
The next piece that we really focus on is the assessment, and I make them go from a head to toe, and I go in the same order: head, toe, mobility, diet, IV. Give it to me in that same order every time. And then that's page 1 and 2. And then page 3 for me is the same thing with Leslie, is the priority. And I make them tell me, what assessment ideas do you have that gives me this as a priority? And somebody had asked in the questions, is it general problems or using NANDA? I make them use concepts. So if it's perfusion, if it's gas exchange, I don't want them to write down a diagnosis. I don't want them to write down anything that is not, big made up. I give them a list of, these are the concepts that you learn through fundamentals. I want you to choose from this list of concepts and give me your top 3. Number 1, tell me your assessment data on your patient specifically as to why you chose this. And then the second one is what's the worst case scenario? Where could this lead? And how will you identify it? What are you looking for? And then lastly, I have them tell me, what are your nursing ideas that you're going to do, or interventions from your clinical companion that are going to say, this is how I'm going to prevent those complications from happening. These are my jobs to make sure this doesn't happen. And then that's my 3 pages. And that by they get to 2 patients the last week, 6, 7, and 8. And then they only have to write an SBAR, and that's it. And it's very short. It's no longer broken apart. It's just give me an SBAR, and I have them do it at the clinical with me, and then they turn it in on paper so that when they get to Beth, there's no more paperwork.
So you've whipped them into shape. It sounds like, Jen, you're kind of like the bridge. You're kind of like, and this is really just like the curriculum. It's like from simple to complex, from fundamental to advanced. And, I see the scaffolding of what you're doing, and what I see kind of what you're building on with Leslie, especially with problem recognition, is a very important question that is, again, a little bit more complex, but it's just a little bit. But what can you do as a nurse to prevent that possible problem? Whether it's early mobility with a post-op patient to prevent a DVT or a PE or, atelectasis and pneumonia, whatever. But the bottom line is you're scaffolding little by little and developing. And what I love what you're doing, Jen, and I wouldn't want to mess with you as a clinical instructor. I can just sense that you're like, in a kind way, you really, what practice because you're still in practice. And so that you don't just ramble for 10 minutes about every random thing on the chart. It's like, what's most important and why, and that need to know, and just bringing it down to its bare element. But you don't do that in fundamentals. They don't know how to do that. And so we've got to bring them just step by step. So we're preparing the way. And that's really what I see here, as well as that emphasis of what is most important. That is the first step of clinical judgment, using the, Tanner's framework or the NGN. It's, what are you noticing that is most important to your patient because of their problem? Not just because it's like, oh, they got a hemoglobin that's 11 and they're running 11.12, like 12.1 normally. Is like that really a problem? Not really. So you're helping them see that. And my question is, how much time do you spend, Jen, with your students to kind of verbally process the clinical paperwork? So it's only about 3 pages, but how much time do you spend with every student to kind of do this verbal? You're kind of doing the verbal processing that Beth is doing completely with a little bit of paperwork, but you're also, it sounds like you're doing it with a dialogue. It's not just, oh, fill out this paperwork and turn it in. So kind of explain that a little bit more.
Well, honestly, I really feel like I almost handhold them into Beth, because I basically say, okay, why is that not important? Let's try again. Let's go back and let's talk about why is that really not where we're headed right now, right? Why is suddenly, like Leslie said, this is not what they were admitted for, but this is our biggest problem now. Why is that? And sometimes it's a psychosocial, because they're getting ready to be discharged and they have no access to healthcare. They have no ride to get to dialysis. I mean, they came in for a renal failure. That's not the issue now. They're going home. We've got them to a point. Now what is our issue? So it's I can kind of walk them through it that way. I usually in the morning is pretty populated with med pass and getting that process done. But then as we move into the day, I don't pass meds after 12 o'clock, because I said, this is our time. And I individually go to each of them and I spend probably 20 minutes with each of them kind of. And as the semester starts, I spend a lot of time in their H&Ps and I say, okay, this is the opening of your H&P and this is the ending of your H&P. Let's talk about that. Let's quiz you on that. And then when we get towards the end of the semester, I no longer do that. And I make them just walk me through it and walk me through their process and where they're at and how they're skimming it down. And if they give me something like, oh, well, I'm thinking I'm going to include this. And I'm like, why is that not that important today? Why are we not really concerned, like you said, about the hemoglobin of 11? Are you going to do anything about that? Is that their norm? Why are they here for a bleed? Did we just give them a liter of fluid? Let's think about what is going on that makes this not important. So, that 20 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but when they have already, like Brooklyn and Leslie have kind of made the path for us. So when I get them, by the time I get them, they have an idea, but they just have this abundance of information. And I'm like, okay, slow down. Let's back this off.
Down a little bit to the most important. And I love what you're doing by asking, like, why is this the priority, or why is that important? Because that gets to the interpretation or meaning of clinical data. And as we understand Tanner's framework, and even the NGN replicates it, what do you notice? What does it mean? Those are the first 2 steps of clinical judgment that we must continually reinforce, Jen. So well done.
Thank you. And like what I tell them all the time is, I'm going to drive you crazy with why, because I'm going to ask you questions and to the point where you don't know the answer. And I tell them, listen, if I get to a point where you don't know the answer, I did my job, because I've taught you something. I've made you think harder. I've made you think a little bit more. So to me, don't be upset when you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. But I also tell them you can't say, I don't know on the first answer and you're done. So,
and I would like to know, at what semester do you begin to really maybe scaffold patient education as a priority? Because that is a scope of the professional nurse. And I'm just curious, like in your semester, Jen, if, when you look at the current priority, if they're going home, patient education, preventing a readmission or understanding a new medicine, where does that kind of fit into the 4 semesters? So it's kind of like, where does it kind of get maybe more of an emphasis, where we're really going to put that on a student's radar? What semester?
I think it probably starts at the beginning.
Do you do it, Brooklyn? Do you kind of bring that, like, what does the patient need to know as it relates to anything related to their current problem or medications? Are you kind of getting that on their radar, and how are you doing that?
A lot of that starts in the didactic portion of foundations. We have a big, huge section on patient education and how are you going to talk to a 5-year-old versus a 35-year-old who's a mom versus a 35-year-old who's a construction worker and didn't finish high school. So like those small bits we get in the didactic portion, and then in clinical, it's almost constant. I don't know about the other semester. Well, I do know I've taught most of them except for Beth's, but constant education, patient education. What do they need to know? How are we going to prevent them, coming back into the hospital? What resources do you need? What resources do they have? Because that's a huge thing. Do they have a computer? Do they have a phone? Can they see their computer? So we definitely start that in foundations and kind of push that through.
And so you're doing the same thing, Leslie, in semester 2. You're just keeping it on their radar, and
so
continue that.
In lecture, every system that we go through, we have a patient education piece, important things that patients will need to know type of a thing. In the clinical setting, I quiz them as we go. If the patient has a new medication that they're being added, okay, what kinds of teachings is your patient going to need when they go home with this medication? Do they have everything that they need? If they have to check their blood pressure and things, are they able to even read the monitor? Do they have access to a blood pressure machine? Those types of things. So we kind of do patient education in the moment.
Excellent. And again, that's kind of real world practice. And, and so what we didn't really, we're going to get to you, Beth, and we're going to close the loop real quickly here. But one of the things that as we look at I don't think we really got this essence. And I think it's really important to at least bring it up before we get to Beth, is that what were the big picture, like the philosophy of this is a good question. The philosophy of clinical education at Mid-Michigan that was the driver for what you're doing right now. So like, it's kind of like, what was the goal? I mean, was it preparing students for practice? Was it helping them pass the NCLEX? Was it helping them to apply there? I mean, what was that big picture that we need to recapture, I think, in nursing education that you're already doing? So what were some of those drivers? And let's get real specific, because there's a philosophy behind this. I want to make sure we all get it, and especially it's communicated in this live stream. Anybody can jump on that one.
I was going to say, I think for me, one of the biggest things where I don't believe that the students were truly learning from all of that paperwork. They were making things up when they got home, and they were adding things that they didn't even have written down because they didn't realize, that was important at the time. So to me, the whole idea behind it, for what I felt was important, is that I need to know that if I sent them out and they had their first job, would I be comfortable with them taking care of my family? And do they have the tools to be successful in the clinical environment? And being able to write a really beautiful 20-page care plan is great, but it doesn't tell me anything about what you're going to do when you get there. It tells me what you have stewed on for 48 hours and how you've been able to create this beautiful multicolor, Brooklyn's example, care plan that looks like you are just an AA student. But again, can you apply what you've learned, and can you show me how it's specific to individual patients, because it's different for everybody?
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that?
For me, it was mostly just having value, have the students being able to find value in the paperwork and things that we're doing. And I remember when I went to nursing school, writing down all of the nursing diagnosis on all of the patients. Honestly, I've never used that once.
No.
And, writing pages of nursing diagnosis is not beneficial. I want them to be able to practice and take care of myself or my family one day or friends, and try to promote some of their critical thinking, because that's honestly where, from me working at bedside, is where I would see that a huge gap.
Yeah. And so what I really hear from what you both said, and it's certainly from Beth last month, she made that loud and clear as well. It is all about clinical education is where the rubber meets the road. You need to be able to understand essential knowledge, apply it to the bedside, and it's about preparing them for real world practice, period. Done. End of story. And if we fail to do that, we fail to do our job as nursing educators. And that's something that I know that we can get sometimes, distracted by. When I began my journey with Keith RN 11 years ago, NANDA and 3-part nursing diagnostic statements were still out there. And I have railed against them because they're not practiced. It's not the way a nurse thinks in practice. Why are we teaching this? I am thankful. I don't know what's happened in 11 years, but NANDA's dead. In essence, in clinical education, where it should have never even gotten a foothold. It did for 30 years. We finally, I think, got it whack-a-mole, and it's still in the ground. Let's keep it there because it's not practice thinking. It's great for, doing your DRGs and, just grading up, kind of like the patient, keep it in the office, not in practice. And so I just want to commend you all for just that emphasis of putting practice first. And that's the paradigm that nursing education needs to recapture and get back, because that's our goal. And I think we all want that, but we lose sight of it, especially with next gen and the challenges of, preparing for NCLEX, we lose sight of practice. But clinical is where it needs to be on the forefront. But what I love, Brooklyn, what you're doing in fundamentals is that your classroom is oriented around practice as well. You're kind of focusing on that education and real, and just keeping it real. And I think that's what I sense is the underlying principle of your entire program, not just clinical. Our entire program at Mid-Michigan is to prepare graduates for practice. And I know that we all want to do that, but various cultures can keep that from happening. And so I just want to say, I want to commend you for that. we're going to get to Beth, and then we're going to get to some questions, because Beth, we need to wrap up the loop. Because really what I want you to do here, I want you to reinforce. Now, you wrote a wonderful blog article for me that I'll just kind of put back in the chat, because it is something that Beth put in writing. Everything that she does, including the kind of questions she asks, to kind of guide the oral care plan. You use Tanner's framework of clinical judgment, a practice-informed framework that came from 200 articles derived from nursing practice in Tanner's original model in 2006. The noticing, the interpreting, the responding and prioritization, and then the evaluation of your patient and the nurse. Tell us how you do it in semester 4, and just summarize, kind of tie the loop on this.
Well, honestly, the key is all the people before me. So when it started with Brooklyn, she focused so hard on the notice. And Leslie brought the notice and started the interpretation, right? To interpret it from Tanner's model. And then Jen started having them not only interpret, then respond and bring it down. And of course, we had reflections throughout the entire program. So what we did is we just took Tanner's model, kind of broke it up and put the emphasis in order and helped the student along.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest takeaways with less clinical paperwork, Keith, and to me, this is the best part, is we actually taught them how to be nurses instead of taught them how to write papers.
Yes.
And because they're getting feedback. I'm sorry, but when they got feedback a week later, most of them don't read it, or they don't remember their patient. Half the stuff, I shouldn't say half, a good portion of it might not have been accurate or true. And so it's make-believe. And so we're responding to make-believe, and then we're like, oh, they're good nurses. Well, you don't just show up at clinical and just fend for yourself, and if no one dies, we win. So instead, we're creating practice-ready nurses by guiding them. We're teaching them clinical side by side throughout the whole program. And so then when they get to
this last semester, and Jen's right, these guys are, I mean, they're rock stars. Or Brooklyn said that. They are. When they get to me, they have been narrowed down. They have been
whipped into shape like a
lifted.
good drill sergeant after they're ready for you.
They are. They're handing off patients. They're doing handoffs in real time to nurses, to other people. You know what's really cool is I have several students that the nurses look to the students even for help. And I mean, they're ready. When they're walking out of that last semester, these guys, it's like they've just finished orientation and they are hitting the ground running, and they're able to perform, and they're safer because they're putting the pieces together, because they've been noticing and reacting from the beginning, not just in a couple weeks. They've been doing this for 2 years.
Right. Exactly. They've been, it's a repetitive framework that's just been reinforced and then built upon semester by semester. So now, Beth, for you, I want to give us the essence. If I am your student and I'm trembling because I know Beth is she doesn't mess around. Basically, what are the questions? If it's my patient, what are you going to ask me from top to finish in that 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the oral care planning and looking at how I'm thinking on my feet? Let's just walk through these questions. That's the essence of your oral care plan.
Well, a lot of it is kind of like what you've already heard,
Start from the beginning. Just do it, demonstrate it.
Well, at the very beginning, they're going to be going off to get their patients. They're going to get their handoff reports just like they would taking over a patient. They're going to look in the chart. They are going to look at that H&P. They're going to review new labs and do the things that a new nurse would do. Right. Then we're going to get ready for med pass. I do have a lead on the floor. So that is their outside rotation. One is a lead. What is a lead? It's basically the charge nurse or my assistant. They're going in ahead of me to prep every student before I get there. It saves me time, and there's collaboration involved. So they're never feeling overwhelmed. They have more people to kind of help them. Then it's, okay, what is this patient here with, right? And what are those biggest problems? What are you worried about? What are you looking for? What are those bigs that are going to go downhill? What do I need to watch for? How do I assess that? Don't want it to, obviously we need to prevent anything that we can. At this point, they are also implementing all of the safety things. They are getting their techs on board. The people in the fourth semester, these nurses are not taking the vitals. They are not doing bed baths. They are not making all the beds. They are delegating all of that off, and they are following up. So their job is to go through that chart, putting the pieces together. And I ask them, what are the most important labs, right? Like Jen had already got them started. What are those labs? What is the trend telling you? Is it doing better? Is it not doing better? Are the interventions working? Do we need to intervene at this point? And so what we're doing is, again, those same questions we would use as nurses that we would ask ourselves. Now we're putting them out loud for the students.
Yeah. And so now you're just wrapping up all the work that was in writing as well as reinforced orally, because really, what I one of the Facebook posts on this whole philosophy saying, well, it's basically, how do you have time for this? How do you have time to do spend 15 minutes with each student to do an oral care plan? And I kind of responded thinking like Beth, you think like an ER nurse and you make it a priority one, that if you do nothing else with your students, you have that 10 to 15 minutes of dialogue, a Socratic dialogue at the varying levels of semester, because you're still doing a Socratic dialogue, Brooklyn and Leslie and Jen. It's just a little bit more paperwork to reinforce it. But then when they get to Beth, it's all Socratic dialogue. But you got to make time for it. It's like if you do nothing else with your students, not even a med pass, not even a skill, but you do that Socratic interaction, that's what ties it all together. And if you don't do that in a semester clinical, and that clinical, that's a missed opportunity that will not improve them for practice. I mean, it's like you've got to make time. There's no excuse. You've got 6 hours, spend that 10 minutes and let something go. Correct? Am I on your track, Beth? I'm just speaking for you.
And absolutely. And I think what's one thing that people miss is we bring so much clinical into our classrooms and into our lab that we've taught them these steps in class. So now it's the doing part. And one of the things I heard earlier was about the education. And we introduced those throughout the classes, and it starts in foundations. And this last semester was the first time implemented, which will, of course, go forward. Our students now have to do 4 hours of service hours. That's what I call it, 4 hours of service hours. So they actually go back into the labs before, from foundations, adult health 1, adult health 2, mental health, whatever one they want. And they actually have to teach and help the earlier students. So because they don't have the knowledge, right? So it's like teaching somebody with no knowledge and helping them get ready for those questions that they don't know, and it sharpens their skills. So we're also, in the later semesters, going back now, implementing more education even into the lab that these guys have to do to help increase the education they're providing at the bedside.
Excellent. And we have got a handful of questions we got to get through because we promised we would, and we're going to. And so I'm going to pop these on the screen. And basically, I think we answered everything to this point. And I'm going to put this one on the screen here real quickly, if we can see it. How do you apply this philosophy of clinical education to a specialty like pediatrics when they're being exposed to new diagnoses, maybe for the first time?
What's really interesting, Keith, is our PEDS and OB instructor is also paperless. She is also oral care plan only. And so
is that the second year, Beth? Is that like the third or fourth semester?
Third semester.
Okay.
She teaches alongside me.
Okay, very good.
And so this is very doable. One, she does a lot of simulations in the skills lab. That really helps because it boosts their confidence. Her class is very flipped. So it's 100% flipped. So she does the pre-podcast lectures, activities in the classroom. So when it gets too clinical, it is performed. And it's the same kind of questions and follow-up.
Can I touch on this super quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Exposed to new diagnoses. That's all of nursing everywhere. I mean, especially in foundations, it's all brand new. The entire world, the entire way of thinking is new. And we can do it in that class where they have no foundational knowledge whatsoever going in. They can absolutely do it in specialties. And that's something that I wanted to get on here really quick before we, get too far into questions and get off, is that I get all the time like, oh, well, they're baby nurses. It's their foundations level. They're not ready for it. They can't do it. You're going to overwhelm them. You're not, and they will rise to that challenge. When I implemented this kind of stuff, my attrition rate did not skyrocket. I didn't have a bunch of students failing. I didn't have them quitting and dropping out. They were like, oh, you want the bar here? We're going to come here. Right. So they are capable of doing all of this stuff. So don't be afraid to dig in.
I think it's called, I have learned, being a parent of 5 children. And again, it's not belittling students in any way, but being a good educator is being like a good parent. It's having high but realistic expectations. And that's a win. And that's exactly what you're saying, Brooklyn. So well stated. Got another great question here we need to get to, and this is on reflection. She says, do you have your students do any reflection after the clinical day? And what are your thoughts about reflection post-clinical? Well, we know that's a foundational element of Tanner's framework, and it's foundational to judgment. What say you ladies? I'll let anyone jump on that one.
Absolutely. We do post-conference after every clinical day. As far as what we do in post-conference, it depends on the types of patients that we take care of. Sometimes if we have a patient that has maybe a diagnosis that they have not seen before, we talk about the disease process, how it's affecting them, complications, what your patient would look like, how would you, tailor your care, those types of things. We also, bring in respiratory to come and talk to the patient or talk to the students and talk to them about maybe BiPAP or, setting up oxygen, those types of things too.
Excellent. What specific questions, debriefing, like in simulation, we do debriefing, and that's essentially what we're doing, in clinical is reflecting on our thinking, strengthening it. What are your favorite questions to ask students to really deepen their reflection on thinking? Anybody have a favorite you'd like to share?
For foundations, what we're mainly using is, so how did things change throughout the day? That's something that, students have a really hard time with, is adapting to dynamic circumstances. Or like, oh, I planned A, B, C, and D, and I went from A to D, and now I'm not sure what to do with myself. I'm very frustrated. So we talk about, okay, so what circumstances brought you from A to D? How did you deal with that? And how can you take that experience and change your future practice? So like, what did you learn from all of the chaos that we deal with every day? That's one that we use a lot in my class.
Excellent. How about you? Let's. I want each of you to share one. So go ahead, Leslie.
So I always ask the students to tell me 3 things that went well and 3 things that did not go well. And so then they can tell me, what things that they thought they went well, why they went well, and then what things would we change for the next time we have that type of patient.
Excellent. All right, Jen.
I actually do less of the, like, I found that over time, as the more I have the students just give me like their patients, I start to lose them. So I actually created like weekly activities for them that they have to do during the clinical when they have downtime. So if they are not doing something, then this is what you should be doing. And one of the things that I have on there is like, I'll have a day where I'll say, okay, your patient's blood sugar is 60. What are you going to do? Where's the algorithm? What does the algorithm show you? And then they'll say, oh, I have to give for 50 to 70, I have to give 1 carb choice. And I'm like, all right, well then figure out how much is 1 carb choice. I want you to go to the pantry and I want you to pull out what's available. And I want you to tell me what is 1 carb choice. And I'll tell them, you don't want to be in the situation and have to figure out in the pantry, what should I be giving them? What should I be giving them? Or giving them so much food that you're chasing your blood sugar. So we'll have a conversation about something like that. And I tend to choose a patient who was a diabetic that day and say, okay, now your patient's blood sugar is 50. And if you say that to them in the clinical, they're like, they are? And I'm like, no. But if they were, what would you do? And what would be your first steps? Or your patient who's here for pneumonia, I'll tell them, oh, your oxygen level is 86. And they're like, it is? I'm like, no. But if it was, what would you do? What would be your first steps? And then we have that conversation in post-conference about, okay, these were the things we talked about with these individual people. Now let's all talk about them. And it kind of gets them thinking on their feet as to what would I do if?
Yeah. And that's called the what if. And what you're doing, Jen, and I think you know this, is that you are basically developing problem recognition skills. You're deepening that problem recognition with every what if. So well done. I love that. How about you, Beth? What's your favorite reflection question, or how do you handle that in post-conference?
Well, I'm the caboose, right? So I'm at the end. So I tell them, okay, you were the nurse that day. There is nobody else. So how did you impact your patient in a positive way? What was your strengths? And by golly, what are the opportunities? What are the things that maybe you struggled with, that you had a difficult time putting the pieces together? Maybe somebody else was making the phone calls to providers, maybe the time, all the time management. So it's really hitting, you're the nurse. If this was your patient tomorrow and you were the only one taking care of this patient, all right, what did you do really well? What do we need to improve upon? And how are you going to improve it? Because it's okay if you identify it, but you also got to have a plan to fix it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add one of my own. How will you apply what you learned today in clinical to improve patient care for each patient after this? It's kind of like, what will that one takeaway be that you can apply and just scaffold and stair step them one step of the way? Got another great question here. We did answer Sandy's question about doing post-conference. How long do you spend in post-conference? That would be a good question. Just real quickly, what is your length of time?
I don't have a
1 hour.
time for
1 hour for Leslie. Jen, 1 hour. Beth, 1 hour. And I would say this, post-conference is one of the most important parts of your clinical. Do not cut it short if you don't have to. And I would agree, a 1 hour is a win to really have that deepening reflection and dialogue that goes with the reflection that you can talk about. So well done. So here's another question. How do you improve consistency with the methods discussed with adjunct clinical instructors? So there is minimal difference between adjunct and full-time clinical groups. So you ladies are all full-time. You own it. Do you have adjuncts? And if so, how do you transfer this knowledge and this strategy to those that are not part of the core group in the full-time world? Love to hear. That's a great question. Thank you for asking, Marian. Anybody want to jump on that, or does that not? Or do you guys use adjuncts at Mid-Michigan?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we
Okay, so
definitely
how does
do.
that work?
Sure.
I think honestly, the whole thought process, they buy in when they realize how much less grading at home they have to do and how engaged they could just be in the clinical and they can go home. So to be honest with you, I think it's an education piece, and it's spending time with them and helping them to understand what it is you're looking for and why you're doing what you're doing. Again, the whys, because I feel like as soon as you explain why and they understand what you're trying to achieve in terms of your outcome, it becomes like second nature to them as well. And we have people that come back semester after semester, so it's actually beneficial to us that way too.
Well, and at the beginning of the semesters, we do have a meeting at the beginning of each semester with the adjuncts where we go over expectations, clinical paperwork, what does that look like? What are we doing? And then regular contact also, and being available to answer questions, I think is huge. I go through and I fill out like examples of my clinical paperwork as if I were a student. Like, look, these are the things I want to see. These are the things I'm looking for, just so they have an idea of my expectations.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
And at the end, I also podcast. So I do that orientation, but I also create a podcast for the instructors too. And so I will have a verbal conversation, and so they can refer to it as often as they need to, which I think is very helpful. And so their expectations, the grading, everything, they can refer back to it using that format.
Excellent. So the bottom line is it's what I hear you all doing. You do a good job mentoring and communicating the expectations and helping them be successful, but not just throwing them a bone and say, good luck. You're really doing some intentional mentoring, which is essential to carry that philosophy. Last question I have so far, at least, is this: how do you apply these ideas in a long-term care setting? And so maybe Brooklyn, do you have long-term care in your fundamentals?
Yeah.
So maybe you'd be the best one for that. Why don't you just
fundamentals is all long-term care. So essentially it'd be a recap of everything I've said. These things that I've been talking about and the questions and the paperwork are all implemented in long-term care. That's what we do in foundations. So I don't know if you want me to reiterate those things, but it's having those conversations all the way through the day. So we don't do medication pass in foundations at our college. We use that time instead to do those questions, to have that conversation. What are you looking for? What do you notice? Those sorts of things. And we have a lot more time to do that in the long-term care settings sometimes. So it actually works a little better for me than some of there's not a time crunch, I guess. So we have a lot more time to do these things.
Excellent. Excellent. And if there's any other questions out there, now is your time. We're going to be wrapping it up in the next 5 minutes. But I do have a question here about a recording. Is there a recording available after the presentation? And I am glad to say, Becky, there is. On my YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse. If you subscribe or just go to it, it's open. And under the live header, you will see this recording immediately after I turn it off. It'll go and be it'll be there for you to download the link. You can watch it, share it, and so it's there for you all. This is a great question we didn't have a chance to answer, but I wanted to include this. How do you grade students in the clinical? Do they get a grade for paperwork and performance? I think that's a great closing question for each of you to answer. So starting with you, Brooklyn, how do you evaluate in your semester?
So mine has the 4 pages. So they do get graded on that, so to speak, but it's not, they're done with the clinical paperwork at the end of the clinical day. There's no turning it in later. We've been having the discussion. So essentially they should be completely done at the end of the clinical day and know I performed really well here. I didn't do so great here. We each have a rubric that have performance indicators. So there are 6 dimensions, and then it'll say specifically so the students know what they're being graded on. The student will verbalize, the abnormal assessment data that they noticed for their primary patient today. That's one performance indicator out of maybe 6 in each category. So they can actually go through and say, did I do that? Yes. Did I do that? Yes. Did I do that? Yes. And we'll talk about that throughout the clinical day. And by the end, they already know what they've gotten at that point.
Okay. How about you, Leslie?
Yes, it's very similar to what Brooklyn and Jen and Beth use. It's a weekly clinical evaluation form that the students fill out. They go through and give themselves a score, and it's broken down by their patient-centered care, safety, quality improvement, their teamwork, collaboration, nursing judgment, and professionalism. And there's a handful of bullet points that they have to meet under each section, and that applies to both their clinical practice as well as their clinical paperwork.
Okay. How about you, Jen? Is it the same?
I use the same QSIN categories, but like I said, I try to walk them through what they're doing and what my expectations are, and then they do get 48 hours to correct the things that we talked about and turn in their final product. One of the things that I find beneficial in that too is I feel like I kind of got them where I wanted them when I gave them the feedback. So if it's not there, it's really easy to say, we kind of talked about this and I have a good idea. And they always like, how do you remember all this? I'm like, well, we sat and spent 20 minutes talking about this person. I know I remember, right? And so to me, a lot of it is done in their ability to do it in the clinical site as well, but they do get 48 hours to make those corrections and then put it in and get some feedback on that.
Okay. And Beth, anything different? Oh, you're muted, Beth. You're not coming through.
I apologize.
There you go.
Being that I don't have any clinical paperwork, it makes it really easy to grade that. I don't have any. They get graded in real time. Now, on their reflection, they will submit a reflection. And that self-reflection is important because just like what Jen said, you're constantly talking about them and you are reflecting throughout. And so we want that documented. I know a lot of people worry, well, what if the student files a grade grievance or they dispute it? Well, they're going to submit that reflection. And then what the instructor is going to do is they're going to take notes throughout the day on that student or those observations. And they're going to spend about, 3 to 5 minutes maybe to put those right into that reflection. And so you will still have your paper trail, as some people worry about, but they are graded solely on performance.
Yeah, excellent. And we got some, Vicki wanted to know, will you share your rubrics? And I will basically do this. This is the perfect time to say this. We have an email contact person. Brooklyn has agreed to be the contact person for all 4 semesters. So if you have a question or follow-up, or you want the rubric and you ask nicely, Brooklyn may agree to do so. If she shared her paperwork, she may do that. I don't know though. So that's up to Brooklyn, but email her. And if you have questions or anything that kind of is just percolated that you wanted to get an answer to, again, Brooklyn she's got that there, and she will be glad to forward to the respective faculty that joined us tonight any specific question. I will have kind of, and Tracy, there was a sample of clinical paperwork. Go in the chat. In the beginning of this, towards the middle, we had the 4 pages that I shared with you of Brooklyn's initial paperwork that kind of laid the foundation for this discussion. And so we just have one more question I'm going to get to right now, and it's this before you close it up tonight. Have you seen improvements in pass rates or other positive indicators after implementing these changes in clinical? This has been like a 4-year journey. This is not just like last year. This has been going on, I think, Beth, if I understood, for 3 or 4 years. So tell us, what are you seeing with your metrics? And again, NCLEX is just one of many. Again, it's important, but what are some other things? What are you seeing? That's a great question to kind of wrap this discussion up with.
So, when we made all of these changes, our pass rates were kind of a little bit low. So if you want to go on pass rates, they weren't doing so great. Well, I would happy to say that since the times that we have implemented all of these changes, our pass rates, and I want to knock on something because I don't want to jinx it, even through COVID when most people took the hit, I think our lowest pass rate was like a 93%. And we had several semesters of 100%. But get rid of the NCLEX, okay? Get rid of that. Because what we see is we have students that are highly sought after. We've actually gotten phone calls from the Mayo Clinic. We've got people calling us from Detroit. Like, what are you doing with your students and can you help us? I mean, seriously, like we get phone calls from some of these other employers, like, can you just send more of your students that are graduating to us because we want to hire them all? And our advisory meetings, you know, our students are highly sought after, but it's because that they're more practice ready. And we have a lot of other schools that do come in, and I would say our students really stand out. And that's not just from ourselves saying that, that's from our clinical partners.
And I think that what you're communicating, Beth, is the bottom line and the brass tacks, that if we as a program really make a paradigm shift and an intentional one, because what I've learned in my journey, you never drift to a destination. You've got to be intentional to say, we are going to prepare graduate nurses for practice. End of story. If you put practice first, the NCLEX will take care of itself. Your story illustrates that, but you've got to be intentional. It's not going to happen by hoping. And what you ladies have done is you provided faculty around the country and hopefully around the world, because we get people from our other countries even watching the live streams. You provided them with a vision to put practice first, to prepare for practice. And that paradigm shift is really what we need to transform nursing education, and you're doing it. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you. I will close with this comment that's kind of a call to action for those that are listening. Before you leave, can you please tell me what you took away from today's presentation, or what you're going to do differently as a result? I'd like to just take a moment to just kind of give you a chance to put that out there and communicate that, because I just got a couple closing thoughts that I just want to let you know that, like I shared with you, next Wednesday, Brooklyn's article on this very topic is going to be on Keith RN. And if you want to basically be first in line to get that, she's going to have a little video, a little 5-minute summary. If you basically get the free case study, you'll get the updates and you'll be right in the inbox. You'll get a free active learning resource to put to use, strengthen practice readiness with the essence of Tanner's framework with open-ended responses. Only 8 questions, but it captures the essence of the Socratic dialogue that we've discussed tonight. And the last thing I just wanted to share before I see what's in the chat is that I have a free Keith RN webinar tomorrow. From 10 a.m. to 12 noon tomorrow. If you just want to learn more about what I do, if you're saying, who is this guy? And you don't know what I do, and just kind of the resources that I provide, a lot of free things, as well as some other things that can help support you, come and join me tomorrow. It's that's the link to sign up for the workshop. It's from 10 to 12 noon tomorrow. And so if you guys can jump in for as little or as much as you can, love to have you join me on Zoom. And other than that, just want to see see what faculty are saying with the feedback. And I just got Suzanne here. Let's just kind of, she just said in closing, she's going to revamp her clinical paperwork. I want my paramedicine to RN students to think like a nurse, not think like a medic. There's a similarity, but there's also a difference. And so I love that. And Beth would say, amen. And you know, that's awesome. And so great feedback. This has been a wonder. I have had the most fun in a long time with this space. I always have fun, but this has been wonderful to have the synergy of 4 guests at once and all sharing their things. And so I just want to thank you all for, again, joining me. You can see the feedback. I'm not going to take additional time because we have ran out about 20 minutes ago. So thank you again for just sticking with this. This has been a timely discussion. And so again, be looking for that blog article next week. The video will be on the YouTube channel as well on next Wednesday. The current Facebook Live from today will be immediately available on the YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse. And again, Brianna, dump NAMDA and focus on concepts. That's like hallelujah. That's what we could have done 30 years ago. And what's taken us so long to bring about needed change. That's what I don't get as a relatively new educator, why we struggle to change and bring practice first. But it's never too late to do the right thing. That's a moral and a life principle. So let's begin as educators to do the right thing as we close out the year. Next, as we look at the summer, if we have it off and again starting, let's reboot, let's reset how we teach clinical as well as how we teach nursing to put practice first. It can be done. in mid-Michigan, an associate degree nursing program, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I mean, Harrisonville and Mount Pleasant. I've never heard of it. I know Detroit, but I know you're out there somewhere. So anyways, well done. And thank you all for joining me. It's been a pleasure. And with that, we'll call it a night. And I just want, if you ladies want to stay with me for just a minute, I'm just going to basically take us off and end this stream.